"If you tear down that fence," I said, keeping my voice as level as a freshly poured concrete slab, "you will be personally, legally, and financially liable for every single dollar of damage they cause. And I assure you, the damage will be catastrophic." Brenda Falwell, president of the Oak Meadows Homeowners Association, just stared at me, her face a mask of pinched fury. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair seemed to vibrate with indignation. We were standing on my front lawn, the afternoon sun casting long shadows that felt as tense as the air between us. She thought she had me cornered, that this was the final checkmate. She had no idea she was the one walking into a trap I'd been meticulously engineering for months. This whole nightmare started over a pile of wood. Not even my wood. It belonged to my late wife, Martha. After Martha passed, I sold our big house in the city and bought this place on the edge of the Oak Meadows development. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, a quiet corner of the world where I could grieve and heal. The property backed onto a large tract of undeveloped woodland, and the peace was exactly what I needed. I was a civil engineer by trade, specializing in geotechnics and structural design. My life had been about foundations, stress loads, and ensuring things didn't collapse. It felt like a cruel irony that my own world had crumbled so completely. The house was perfect, but the backyard was a mess. It sloped dramatically, making most of it unusable. Martha had always dreamed of a sprawling garden with a stone patio where we could sit in the evenings. Building that for her, even though she was gone, felt like the only thing I could do. It was a project, a purpose. It was a way to build something beautiful out of the wreckage. So I spent the first 6 months designing and constructing a retaining wall. This wasn't some weekend warrior project with a few stacked landscape blocks. This was a proper, engineered structure. I dug deep footings, laid rebar grids that would make a bridge builder proud, and poured high-strength, fiber-reinforced concrete. The wall was a beast, 2 feet thick at the base and tapering to 12 inches at the top, standing a solid 6 feet tall at its highest point. It leveled my entire backyard, turning a useless, erosion-prone hill into a perfect, flat canvas for Martha's garden. On top of this concrete retaining wall, I built a fence. A simple, 6-foot privacy fence made of cedar. It was aesthetically pleasing and, more importantly, it provided a safety barrier. The final result was a seamless, 12-foot barrier at the back of my property, a fortress of solitude that gave me privacy and the space to build a tribute to my wife. I thought it was a masterpiece of function and form. Brenda Falwell thought it was a declaration of war. The first letter arrived a week after I hammered the last nail. It was printed on crisp, cream-colored letterhead with the Oak Meadows HOA logo embossed at the top. It was a notice of violation. Unapproved structure, it read in a severe, bold font. Fence exceeds the maximum allowable height of 6 feet, it cited a bylaw, Section C, Paragraph 4. A fine of $50 was attached, with a threat of $100 per day until the violation was rectified. I chuckled when I read it. A simple misunderstanding. I figured a quick phone call would clear it up. "Hello, Brenda," I said politely when she answered. "This is Frank Miller at 112 Willow Creek Lane. I just received a notice about my fence, and I think there's been a small mistake." "There are no mistakes, Mr. Miller," her voice was like ice chips in a blender. "Only violations. Your fence is nearly 12 feet high. It is a monstrosity and it is coming down." "Well, you see," I explained patiently, shifting into my engineer mode, "the structure is actually 2 separate components. There's a 6-foot retaining wall, which is a foundational structure, not a fence. And on top of that is a 6-foot privacy fence. Both components individually comply with all county codes and, as far as I can tell, your bylaws." "I don't care about your components," she snapped. "I care about what I see. And I see a 12-foot wall of wood that is an eyesore to this community. You have 30 days to remove it." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling the first stirrings of real annoyance. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a power trip. I wasn't just some resident, I was a challenge to her authority. I decided to handle it professionally. I wrote a detailed letter back to the HOA board, complete with schematics of the wall and fence, a copy of my county-approved building permit for the retaining wall, and a clear, concise explanation of the structural necessity of the wall. I even cited the legal definition of a fence versus a retaining wall under state law. I ended the letter by respectfully requesting they rescind the fine and withdraw their demand. I was proud of that letter. It was logical, factual, and irrefutable. It was the kind of document I'd present to a city planning commission or a corporate client. Her response was to double the fine and send a second letter, this one with a new violation: improper storage of construction materials. She was referring to a small, neatly stacked pile of leftover cedar planks at the side of my house, covered by a tarp. These were special. They were the last of the wood Martha had bought for a garden bench she never got to build. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of them. The second letter felt different. It felt personal. She was poking at me, trying to find a weak spot. It was no longer about the fence, it was about submission. That's when I decided to do some digging. Not in my yard, but into the Oak Meadows HOA itself. The bylaws she quoted were public record, so I spent an evening reading the entire 100-page document. It was a masterpiece of vague, contradictory, and selectively enforceable nonsense. But I found something interesting. The bylaws gave the Architectural Control Committee, headed by Brenda, authority over fences, sheds, and other cosmetic additions. It said nothing about foundational or structural engineering projects like retaining walls, which were governed by county code. My wall was legal. Her authority over it was a complete fabrication. I also started attending the monthly HOA meetings. They were held in the sterile community clubhouse, and the atmosphere was thick with a kind of quiet desperation. Brenda ran them like a dictator in a floral pantsuit. She would publicly berate residents for minor infractions: a garbage can left out an hour too long, a slightly overgrown rose bush. People shrank under her gaze. They were afraid of her. I saw then that this wasn't just about me. This was a pattern of abuse. She fed on this control, this petty tyranny. I tried to present my case at the next meeting. I stood up, calm and prepared, with my folder of documents. Regarding the violation at 112 Willow Creek, I began. "We are not discussing your illegal fortress in a public forum, Mr. Miller," Brenda cut me off, her voice sharp. "This is for official HOA business." "This is official business," I countered. "It involves a misapplication of the bylaws and you are out of order. If you speak again, I will have you removed." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their plastic chairs, but no one said a word. They just stared at their laps. Her power was absolute because their fear allowed it to be. The fines kept coming. They were up to thousands of dollars now. Threatening letters from the HOA's lawyer started appearing in my mailbox. They were planning to put a lien on my house. That's when my annoyance curdled into cold, hard resolve. She was trying to take my home. The sanctuary I had built to honor my wife. She was trampling on my peace, on my grief, for the sake of her own ego. This was the turning point. I had tried reason. I had tried logic. I had tried following the proper channels. Now, it was time to use my own skills not just for defense, but for offense. This wasn't going to be a simple fight anymore. This was going to be a project. A demolition project. And Brenda Falwell's little empire was the structure I was going to bring down. My first step was to protect myself. I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense guy named David who specialized in property law. I laid everything out for him: the plans, the permits, the letters, my research into the bylaws. David grinned. "Frank, this is beautiful. She doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. The retaining wall is completely outside her jurisdiction." He advised me to put the money for the fines into an escrow account. It showed we were acting in good faith but not capitulating to an illegal demand. "But I don't just want to defend," I told him. "I want to end this. For good." "For that," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you'll need more than just a good defense. You'll need leverage. Something she can't dismiss or shout down." So my investigation deepened. I started talking to my neighbors. Quietly, at first. I'd catch them while they were getting their mail or walking their dogs. Most were skittish, afraid to be seen talking to the neighborhood pariah. But I found a few who were just as fed up as I was. One of them was George, a retired land surveyor who lived 2 streets over. He'd had his own run-in with Brenda over the exact placement of a maple tree he'd planted. He knew property lines and local ordinances better than anyone. "She's a bully, Frank," he told me over coffee in his kitchen. Always has been. But she's gotten worse the last few years. More aggressive. More desperate, almost. George became my ally. Together, we pulled the original plat maps for the entire Oak Meadows development. We spent a weekend cross-referencing them with the county's digital property records. And that's when we found the first crack in Brenda's foundation. The community green space that ran behind my property, the very space Brenda claimed my monstrosity of a fence was encroaching upon, wasn't actually HOA property. According to the original deeds filed by the developer 20 years ago, it was an undate buffer zone that belonged to the county. The HOA was tasked with maintaining it, but they didn't own it. Brenda had been fining people for violations on land she had zero legal authority over. "This is good," David said when I showed him the maps. "This is very good. It establishes a pattern of misrepresentation of authority." But I knew it wasn't enough. Humiliating her over a technicality wouldn't stop her. A true tyrant doesn't back down when they're wrong, they just find a new weapon. I needed something more. I needed to know why she was, as George put it, desperate. Desperation, in my experience, usually traces back to one thing: money. The HOA's financial statements were, in theory, available to all members. I formally requested a copy. What I received was a joke. It was a one-page summary, full of vague categories like landscaping, $50,000, and administrative expenses, $35,000. It was the kind of report designed to reveal nothing. This was the moment my plan began to truly take shape. It wouldn't be a quick, explosive demolition. It would be a careful, calculated deconstruction, piece by piece, until the whole rotten structure collapsed on its own. It was an engineering problem, and I was going to solve it. The first phase of my project was surveillance. I was a private man, and the idea of cameras on my own property was distasteful, but it had become a necessity. I installed a series of high-definition, motion-activated security cameras around my house. They were small, discreet, and covered every angle of my property, especially the back fence and the side yard where Martha's wood was stacked. Phase 2 was documentation. I bought a digital voice recorder. Every interaction with Brenda, every phone call, was recorded. Every letter was scanned and archived. I started a log, a detailed journal of every fine, every threat, every passive-aggressive comment she made as she drove past my house. I was building a mountain of evidence, brick by painstaking brick. Brenda, meanwhile, was escalating. She saw my refusal to bow as a personal affront. She started a smear campaign. She told neighbors I was a recluse, that my giant wall was lowering property values. She'd stand out on the street and point at my house while talking to other residents, making sure I could see her. The HOA's lawyer sent a formal notice: if the fence wasn't removed within 14 days, they would hire a contractor to forcibly remove it and bill me for the cost, plus administrative fees. This was the bait I was waiting for. "Let them try," I told David. "Are you sure, Frank?" he asked. "That could get messy." "I'm sure," I said. "I'm counting on it." Because I had a secret. A secret that was currently living in the newly leveled, securely fenced-in, and very private backyard I had built. A secret that Brenda Falwell was about to unleash upon herself. Before moving, I had sold off most of my city possessions, but I couldn't part with my hobby. For years, I had raised a small number of American guinea hogs. They're a heritage breed, smaller than commercial pigs, placid in temperament, and known for their ability to thrive on foraging. I had a boar, Brutus, and 2 sows, Petunia and Daisy. They were my pets, in a way. A connection to a simpler, more grounded way of life that Martha and I had always talked about retiring to. My new property, with its large yard backing onto woodland, was zoned to allow for a small number of non-commercial livestock. It was one of the reasons I bought it. My retaining wall and fence weren't just for privacy and a garden. They were to create a secure enclosure for Brutus and the girls. The fence wasn't just keeping people from looking in, it was keeping my hogs from getting out. The day the contractor was scheduled to arrive, I was ready. I had my cameras recording, my phone ready to call the sheriff for trespassing, and David on speed dial. But most importantly, the night before, I had opened the gate to their large, comfortable pen in the far corner of the yard. For the first time, Brutus, Petunia, and Daisy had free reign of the entire half-acre of lawn behind my house. They were in hog heaven, happily tilling the fresh sod with their snouts, rooting for grubs, and generally making a glorious, muddy mess of Martha's future garden. It pained me a little to see it, but I knew the soil would recover. Brenda's reputation, however, would not. At 9 in the morning, a pickup truck from Falwell Landscaping pulled up. My eyebrows shot up. Falwell. I did a quick search on my phone. The company was registered to Brenda's husband, Robert Falwell. She wasn't hiring a contractor, she was trying to funnel HOA money directly into her own family's pocket. The corruption was more blatant than I had even imagined. I watched on my monitor as 2 men got out, followed by Brenda herself, who pointed dramatically at my fence. They unloaded chainsaws and crowbars. This was it. I walked out my front door, phone in hand, recording. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm. "You and your men are on my property. This is your final warning to leave before I call the authorities." "This is HOA property," she shrieked, her voice cracking with righteous fury. "And we are removing this illegal structure as per the board's directive." She was performing for the 2 burly workers, playing the part of the woman in charge. "This is private property," I stated flatly. "You are trespassing. And that fence," I paused, letting the moment hang in the air, "is a load-bearing livestock enclosure. If you damage its integrity, you will be responsible for the consequences." She laughed. A shrill, ugly sound. "Livestock. Don't be ridiculous, Mr. Miller. What are you hiding back there, a couple of chickens? We're taking the fence down." She gave her men the signal. One of them fired up a chainsaw. The sound ripped through the quiet morning air. He approached the fence and began to cut into one of the main support posts. I didn't shout. I didn't run over. I just stood there, a small, sad smile on my face. "Don't say I didn't warn you," I said, loud enough for my phone to pick it up clearly. The post creaked, groaned, and then snapped. The section of fence it supported sagged inward. And then, through the newly created gap, a curious black snout appeared, followed by the massive, bristly head of Brutus, my 250-pound boar. He sniffed the air, blinked in the bright sunlight, and let out a low, guttural grunt. Petunia and Daisy pushed in behind him, equally curious. The man with the chainsaw froze, his eyes wide. Brenda's triumphant smirk dissolved into a slack-jawed stare of disbelief. "What? What are those?" she stammered. "That," I said, "is Brutus. And he, his wives, and their impending litter of piglets are now your responsibility. Good luck." Brutus, seeing the lovely, manicured lawn of Brenda's next-door sycophant, Carol, decided to go exploring. He trotted through the gap in the fence, the sows right behind him. They immediately went to work, their snouts acting like miniature rototillers, tearing up Carol's prize-winning petunias and aerating her perfect turf. The 2 landscapers dropped their tools and scrambled back towards their truck. Brenda just stood there, paralyzed, as a high-pitched scream erupted from Carol's house. "My garden. My award-winning garden." Carol wailed from her patio door. Brenda finally snapped out of her trance. "Get them. Do something," she shrieked at her husband's employees. The men looked from the hogs to Brenda and back again. One of them just shook his head and got in the truck. The other followed suit. They weren't paid enough to wrestle with pigs. Within minutes, the street looked like a scene from a bizarre farm comedy. My 3 hogs were having the time of their lives, enthusiastically landscaping 2 of the most meticulously maintained lawns in Oak Meadows. Carol was having a full-blown meltdown on her porch. And Brenda was running back and forth on the street, flapping her hands and screeching, a general with no army and an invading force of swine. I calmly called the sheriff's department to report a case of criminal mischief and property damage. My property damage? The fence. I then called David. "It's done," I said. "Phase 3 is complete," I could hear him laughing on the other end of the line. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, the scene was even more chaotic. Brenda was trying to shoot Brutus with a decorative flamingo she'd yanked from a neighbor's yard. Brutus, unimpressed, simply nudged it with his snout and continued his excavation of a pristine rose bush. I presented the deputy with my evidence. The video of Brenda ordering her men to destroy my fence. The property survey showing the fence was entirely on my land. My county permit for the hogs. So, let me get this straight, the deputy said, rubbing his temples. She hired her husband's company to illegally destroy your fence, which then released your livestock, which are now destroying the neighbors' yards. That about sums it up, I confirmed. And you warned her this would happen. It's all on video, I said, pointing to my phone. The deputy sighed the weary sigh of a man who had seen too much. He went over to talk to Brenda. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see her gesticulating wildly, her face turning a shade of crimson I had previously only seen in brake lights. The end result of that morning was glorious. Brenda was cited for criminal mischief. Her husband's company was on the hook for the cost of repairing my fence. And, because I had so clearly warned her of the consequences, she was deemed liable for every cent of the thousands of dollars in damage Brutus and the girls had done to the neighboring lawns. The story of Brenda's pigpocalypse spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. For the first time, people weren't looking at me like the crazy recluse with the giant wall. They were looking at me with a kind of awe. I was the man who had stood up to the dragon and won, not with fire, but with bacon. Well, potential bacon. But I knew this wasn't the end. I had won the battle, in a spectacular and deeply satisfying way. But the war wasn't over. I had publicly humiliated her. A woman like Brenda doesn't just accept defeat. She doubles down. She plots revenge. And her retaliation, I suspected, would be far more vicious than fines and nasty letters. I was right. The week after the pig incident, the mood in the neighborhood shifted. The fear that had once surrounded Brenda was replaced by widespread mockery. People would snort when she walked by. Someone left a bag of pork rinds on her doorstep. Her iron-fisted rule had been shattered by the comical image of her fighting a losing battle against a 250-pound hog. But her power, while damaged, was not gone. She still controlled the HOA board, which was stacked with her loyal cronies. And now, she had a personal vendetta against me. The official HOA harassment stopped. The letters and fines ceased. In their place came something far more insidious. She launched a campaign to destroy my life outside the neighborhood. The first salvo was a formal complaint filed with the State Engineering Licensing Board. It was a thick packet of lies, accusing me of performing unpermitted work, my wall was permitted, creating a public nuisance, the hogs were legally kept, and of professional misconduct for building a dangerously unstable structure that threatened the community. She had even convinced her friend Carol, the one with the destroyed petunias, to sign a sworn affidavit saying my wall was causing cracks in her foundation. This was a serious attack. A threat to my livelihood, the profession I had dedicated my life to. An investigation by the licensing board, even a frivolous one, could tarnish my reputation forever. I had to respond, and respond with overwhelming force. I hired a structural engineering firm, a competitor, technically, but one I respected, to perform an independent analysis of my retaining wall. They spent a day on my property, taking soil samples, using ground-penetrating radar to map the rebar grid, and performing ultrasound tests on the concrete to check for integrity. Their final report was a thing of beauty. It not only confirmed that my wall was structurally sound and built to a standard far exceeding residential code requirements, but it also included a geotechnical survey showing that without the wall, my property, and the properties downhill from it, including Carol's, would be at significant risk of a landslide during heavy rains. My wall wasn't a threat, it was a shield, protecting the very people she'd enlisted to attack me. I sent the report to the licensing board. The complaint against me was dismissed within a week. But I held onto a copy of that report. It was another piece of ammunition. Brenda's next attack was even more personal. She started spreading rumors that I was a danger to the community's children. She twisted the story of my quiet grief into something sinister. I was the strange, solitary man who lived behind a fortress. Who knew what I was doing back there? The privacy fence, once a symbol of her obsession with rules, was now painted as a shield for some unspoken depravity. This crossed a line I hadn't even known existed. To use my wife's death, my need for a quiet place to heal, and twist it into something so ugly. It was pure evil. The cold resolve I felt before now burned with a white-hot anger. She wasn't just a bully anymore. She was a monster. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to pull the pin on the grenade I had been carefully constructing. My first move was to revisit the HOA's finances. The vague, one-page summary she had provided wasn't going to cut it. Under state law, I was entitled to review the detailed financial records. I had David, my lawyer, draft a formal, legally binding request for access to every invoice, every bank statement, and every contract for the last 5 years. The request was met with furious refusal. Brenda sent back a letter from the HOA lawyer stating that the records were confidential and proprietary. It was a ridiculous claim, and we both knew it was just a delaying tactic. "She's hiding something, David," I said. "Something big." "I know," he replied. "And her stonewalling is, by itself, a violation of the State Nonprofit Corporation Act. We can sue to compel access. But a lawsuit would be slow. I needed a faster way to get behind her financial walls. And that's when the whistleblower appeared. His name was Arthur. A quiet, meek accountant who had been the HOA treasurer for the past decade. He was one of Brenda's cronies, a man who always voted her way and never spoke a word at meetings. He called me from a blocked number, his voice trembling. "Mr. Miller. My name is Arthur. I need to talk to you." Not on the phone. We met in a coffee shop in the next town over. He was a nervous wreck, constantly looking over his shoulder. He laid a plain manila envelope on the table between us. "She's been doing it for years," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. I didn't know what to do. "She controls everything. If I said no, she'd ruin me." "Doing what, Arthur?" I asked gently. "The landscaping contract," he said, his voice cracking. "It's a fraud. The HOA pays Falwell Landscaping $50,000 a year. But the work they do, it's maybe $10,000, tops. The rest, she has me write checks for materials and equipment rentals from a supplier." He pushed the envelope towards me. "That supplier doesn't exist. The address is a post office box she owns. She's been embezzling at least $30,000 a year from the HOA. For 5 years that I know of." Inside the envelope were copies of invoices from the fake supplier and bank statements showing transfers into an account under Brenda's maiden name. It was the smoking gun. Clear, undeniable proof of felony embezzlement. "Why are you telling me this now, Arthur?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "When she filed that complaint against your engineering license. My son is an engineer. I know what that means. It's not just about fines anymore. She's trying to destroy a man's life. I can't be a part of that. I can't." I finally understood George's comment about her being desperate. She wasn't just fighting for power. She was fighting to keep her crimes from being discovered. My retaining wall project, with its high visibility and my refusal to back down, had put a spotlight on the HOA's activities. I was a threat that had to be eliminated because I might start asking the right questions. Which, of course, I had. I now had all the pieces. The property law violations. The professional harassment. And now, felony fraud. It was time to engineer the final showdown. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. A police investigation would be quiet, and she'd be arrested discreetly. I wanted something more. I wanted poetic justice. I wanted her reign to end in the same public forum she had used to terrorize everyone else. I used her own tactics against her. I requested a special emergency meeting of the Homeowners Association. The bylaws allowed for this if a petition was signed by 10% of the members. Getting the signatures was surprisingly easy. The story of the pigpocalypse, combined with the rumors she was spreading about me, had made people angry. They were tired of the drama. They wanted answers. The topic of the meeting, as stated on the petition, was a vote of no confidence in the president and a review of allegations of misconduct. Brenda couldn't refuse. To do so would be an admission of guilt. She scheduled the meeting, but she stacked the deck. She sent out an email to all residents the day before, a masterpiece of manipulative propaganda. In it, she painted me as a disgruntled, unstable man who was harassing her because he couldn't handle being told to follow the rules. She claimed I was trying to take over the HOA for my own selfish purposes. She ended by saying she would present evidence at the meeting that would expose Mr. Miller for who he truly is. It was perfect. She was turning the meeting into a trial, with herself as the prosecutor and me as the defendant. She had no idea I was the one who had built the courtroom, and she was the one walking to the gallows. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. It was standing room only. The air was electric with tension. Brenda sat at the head table, flanked by her two remaining board cronies. She looked smug, confident. She had a thick folder in front of her, her evidence. I sat in the front row, with George on one side and my lawyer, David, on the other. My own folder was much slimmer. I didn't need volume. I had precision. Brenda banged the gavel. "This emergency meeting is now in session," she announced, her voice ringing with false authority. "We are here to address the baseless and malicious campaign being waged against this board by Mr. Frank Miller." She launched into her tirade, her voice dripping with venom. She accused me of being a bad neighbor, of threatening her, of deliberately creating a hazard with my illegal wall. She held up photos of Carol's ruined garden as if they were evidence of a capital crime. "This man," she declared, pointing a trembling finger at me, "thinks the rules don't apply to him. He thinks he can do whatever he wants. But Oak Meadows has standards, and as your president, I will not let one man tear our community apart." She finished to scattered, uncertain applause from her few remaining supporters. She looked at me, a triumphant sneer on her face. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Mr. Miller?" I stood up and walked to the podium. I placed my folder on the lectern. "I do," I said, my voice calm and clear, amplified by the small microphone. "Brenda has made several accusations. I'd like to address them, not with opinions or insults, but with facts. Let's call them exhibits." I projected my laptop screen onto the wall behind Brenda. Exhibit A, the fence. I brought up the official county plat map. I used a laser pointer to show my property line. As you can see from the county's own records, my fence and retaining wall are located entirely on my private property. I then clicked to the next slide. Exhibit B, the law. I displayed the relevant section of the HOA bylaws, highlighting the part that limited the board's authority to cosmetic additions. Then I put up the section of the state building code that defined retaining walls as structural foundations, governed by the county, not the HOA. My wall was fully permitted by the county, I said. The HOA has, and has always had, zero legal jurisdiction over it. Every fine, every threat, every letter from your lawyer regarding my wall was based on a lie. A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's face had gone from smug to stony. Exhibit C, the harassment. I played a short audio clip from my digital recorder. It was Brenda, on the phone, screaming at me. "I don't care about your components. I care about what I see. And I see a 12-foot wall of wood that is an eyesore." The audio quality was perfect. Her screeching filled the room. People winced. I then showed a copy of the complaint she filed with the State Engineering Board. Brenda accused me of professional misconduct, an action intended to destroy my ability to earn a living. I switched the slide. And Exhibit D, the truth. I displayed the executive summary of the independent engineering report. I read the conclusion aloud. "The retaining wall at 112 Willow Creek Lane is not only structurally sound but actively prevents potential landslide damage to the downhill properties." I pointed the laser at Carol's house on the map. "My wall isn't threatening your home, Carol. It's protecting it." Carol, sitting in the second row, looked stunned. Her face went pale. The crowd was buzzing now. The tide of opinion was turning, and it was turning fast. Brenda was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "This is all just technical nonsense," she stammered. "It doesn't change the fact that you have brought this community into disrepute. You have violated the spirit of the rules." "Let's talk about the spirit of the rules, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping a notch, becoming colder. "Let's talk about fiduciary duty. The duty of a board president to manage the community's money honestly." I looked directly at Arthur, the treasurer, who was sitting next to Brenda. He was sweating profusely, looking like he was about to be sick. "Let's talk about Exhibit E, Falwell Landscaping." I put up a copy of the HOA's contract with her husband's company. $50,000 a year. Then I put up a series of photos I had taken over the past few months, showing the landscaping crew, often just one guy, mowing the small patches of common grass. An audible gasp went through the room. I consulted with 3 independent landscaping companies, I continued. The high-end estimate to perform these services was $12,000 a year. Which raises a question, where is the other $38,000 going? Brenda shot to her feet. This meeting is over, she shrieked. You have no right. I'm not finished, I said, my voice overriding hers. The room was dead silent, hanging on my every word. I believe the money is going here. I projected a copy of an invoice from Midstate Garden and Equipment Supply, the fake company. And beside it, a copy of a bank statement for the account it was paid into. The account was in the name of Brenda Wallace, her maiden name. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the heavy, crushing silence of a foundation giving way just before a building collapses. Arthur, the treasurer, let out a small sob. He buried his face in his hands. Brenda just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound coming out. The color drained from her face. She looked at the faces in the crowd, her neighbors, the people she had bullied and lorded over for years, and saw only contempt. That, I said, turning off the projector, is called embezzlement. It's a felony. And I have 5 years' worth of records right here. I tapped the manila envelope Arthur had given me. Just then, the 2 back doors of the clubhouse opened. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, followed by a plainclothes detective. They had been waiting outside, listening with David, who had slipped out to get them. The detective walked calmly up to the head table. Brenda Falwell, he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. You're under arrest for fraud and embezzlement. The entire room erupted. Brenda let out a guttural scream of pure, animal rage. It wasn't a denial. It was the sound of a cornered animal. She lunged, not at the police, but at me. She tried to claw her way across the table, her face a grotesque mask of hatred. You ruined everything, she screamed, her voice a raw shriek. The officers intercepted her easily. They pulled her back and cuffed her hands behind her back. The fight went out of her instantly. She sagged, defeated, a puppet with its strings cut. As they led her away, she twisted her head to look at me one last time. Her eyes were full of a dead, hollow hatred. This isn't over, she hissed. But it was. We both knew it. Her house of cards hadn't just collapsed, it had been pulverized into dust. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With Brenda gone, the rest of her board resigned in disgrace. A new, interim board was elected at that very meeting, with my quiet ally George as the new president. The community, freed from its tyrant, felt like it could breathe again. The legal proceedings were a formality. Faced with Arthur's testimony and the mountain of financial evidence I had compiled, Brenda pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison and ordered to pay back over $150,000 in restitution to the HOA. The court put a lien on her house, the same tactic she had tried to use on me, and it was eventually sold to cover her debts. She lost everything. Her home, her money, her reputation. The HOA, under George's leadership, underwent a radical transformation. He and the new board did a top-to-bottom review of the bylaws, eliminating the vague, unenforceable rules and focusing on common-sense guidelines that actually improved the community. The atmosphere of fear was replaced by one of cooperation. People started talking to each other again. My life returned to the peace I had sought when I first moved there. Martha's garden was planted. The sod the hogs had tilled grew back richer and greener than before. I built the stone bench from her leftover cedar planks and placed it in the center of the garden, a quiet place to sit and remember. The neighbors who had once shunned me now treated me as a reluctant hero. They'd wave as they walked by. Carol, whose lawn had long since been repaired at Brenda's expense, even brought me a homemade apple pie as a peace offering. She apologized for signing Brenda's affidavit, explaining how intimidated she had been. I accepted her apology. The war was over, there was no need for any more casualties. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, I'd sit on Martha's bench, a cold beer in my hand, and look at the solid, immovable retaining wall I had built. Brutus and the girls would be grunting contentedly in their pen. The wall was more than just concrete and rebar. It was a monument to standing your ground. I had come to Oak Meadows looking for a foundation to rebuild my life on. I never imagined I'd have to literally build one myself, and then defend it from a petty tyrant. But in doing so, in fighting back not with anger but with methodical precision, I had not only protected my own sanctuary but had liberated an entire community. The peace I found was deeper than the one I had lost, because it was a peace I had earned. And I knew, with a certainty as solid as the wall itself, that Martha would have been proud.